Hey everyone, I'm NATO King, and welcome back for the final bonus video of Folklore. I'm going to start by showing you the attract modes for the game. This is the one in the PlayStation menu. It's kinda tiny, but at least you got a nice background. And then if we sit at the title screen for long enough, we get the original trailer for the game. Kinda gets you hyped for the game, doesn't it? Now, the big thing that we didn't do during the game, and probably the bulk of this video, is that we had a major choice in Chapter 3 over which path we were going to send each character on. Now, in the main game, of course, we voted to send Keats to the Swamp of Oblivion and Ellen into the palace to fight the Folklore. So this is just a quick look at how it goes the other way around. Mostly, the distribution of folks is going to be a bit different, but of course, the story that comes at the end of the chapter is going to be different depending on which path each character took. For example, in this room, Ellen fought Acidia, and then she was able to come back and get the Cloak of the Deep. Going this way around, she won't be able to get the Cloak of the Deep until Chapter 4, which is the earliest time that she'll be able to return to this part of the game. In this chapter, she's completely blocked from entering the Forgotten Palace. And so far, there are no new folks for Keats in the second half. The other thing that's really different between the two paths is that there are a lot of really good upgrade materials here. Whichever character goes to the Forgotten Palace is going to collect a bunch of them. For Keats, they're rubies and emeralds. For Ellen, obviously, they were yellow and purple stones. So Ellen was able to upgrade Gaboy a lot earlier than she would normally be able to because of the purple stones that were here. Again, she can't get those. I think they would appear in Chapter 4 if I came back, but I didn't try that. And of course, late in Chapter 4 is when she'll be able to get purple stones regularly. I really didn't want to try to capture that Afang, I wanted to capture the Selkie. Occasionally, the targeting on the captures is really bad. On the plus side of sending Keats in this direction, we do get plenty of rubies, which we'll be able to use to upgrade Hinky Punk. And I don't remember when rubies became regularly available, but it was pretty late into the game, I think. And I think they're dropped by some pretty tough enemies. So, not the sort of thing that you want to do a lot of fighting to grind for. It's a lot easier if you can just collect a bunch of them lying around. Or get them as rewards from quests, of course. Granted, I didn't get a whole lot out of my Transcension there, but at the very least, it protected me from damage from all the folks that were in this room. It's pretty tough fighting these guys at Chapter 3 power levels. And remembering that Augusti was really, really useful against Brigantia, I'm going to try to build it up as much as I can here. Even though I'm not taking the time to go off and complete all the quests and grind for karmas, which would of course make the rest of the chapter a heck of a lot easier. I seem to be really bad with aiming some of the folks that I don't use all that much. The fastest way to get to the room that I haven't entered yet is to go through the Excedra room. And like I think I said at some point in the LP, I think the mini-bosses here are considerably easier to fight in this configuration, where you're fighting Excedra in this smaller room, so it doesn't have a lot of room to run away from you. And that was me finally remembering that all those rubies I got are good for Hinky Punk. Yeah, when Ellen fights Malabaricus, of course, in the Swamp of Oblivion, it's a lot easier because you've got more room to dodge, as you may remember. Granted, that means it can get farther away, but it doesn't tend to do that. Excedra sort of takes off in a straight line, and you'll have to run to catch up with it. I don't think this corner is a very good place for me to be. But Orcadia gives Keats a lot of options for keeping folks far away from him and still doing damage. And there's still one more ammo count to upgrade, so might as well go for it. I'll capture these 3. And then there are 2 in one of the rooms that I passed, so I can just go back, get those 2, and all done. Admittedly, Barrager doesn't really come into its own until Chapter 7, when you can get the final upgrade for it, but it works pretty well here, too. And a well-timed rank up, I think. Admittedly, you've seen pretty much everything there is to see in the Forgotten Palace this time around. I wouldn't say there's a whole lot of interest, but it's not going to be that long a video, I don't think. And this is really about, I think, the minimum of preparation that would be required to go up against Brigantia. I'm going to have a bit of a tougher time, particularly as Ellen, since going this way I won't be able to get Gaboy's final karma, which was more or less instrumental for taking down Brigantia. You know, without that, Gaboy just isn't able to hit Brigantia all that well, and you're kinda stuck with Hobbledy. Which isn't a terrible folk, but isn't really the best for the job. I don't think. So that's about all the building up I think I really need to do here. Go on into the final room before the boss, where the dialogue has changed a little bit. I'm a little confused because Keats says here and in the Netherworld, but here kinda is the Netherworld. But they get a lot more philosophical this time, I think. So the last room, pretty familiar. I don't think there's ever a reason to come back here after you've beaten the boss, so we've only seen it once as Ellen. I decided to give Jaruku a go because I don't really use it all that often, but it's much slower than Quasarilli at taking down Selkies, so gotta use the right tool for the job. Although I guess this game does kind of encourage not thinking of the folks as tools so much. Yeah, at least in some contexts, they do have distinct personalities and stories. I guess it's kind of fascinating in a way. And you've already seen me fight Brigantia with much more powerful folks, so I'm not going to make you sit through doing it at this level. So I guess in this continuity, Hervé chooses to hide something. Now, one thing to notice about these scenes is that Hervé never told Keats where the will was hidden. But as he leaves the undersea city, Keats just kinda knows where it is. Of course, I think we know why. And now on to the second half of the chapter, where Ellen follows in Keats's former footsteps. So I guess we get to see a little more of the relationship between Scarecrow and the Fairy Lord, or perhaps the relative lack of one. Scarecrow doesn't seem at all enamored with his employer, if he can even really be called an employer. I'm still not entirely sure I follow exactly how the two of them get along. I mean, I guess in the end, Scarecrow's kinda using the Fairy Lord as his way of getting to the Netherworld core and accomplishing his purpose. And it's kinda neat to look back at some of the earlier parts of the game once you know what's going on. As it is, the Swamp of Oblivion is a little bit more straightforward than the Forgotten Palace was. While it does kinda loop around, there's really only one path and then a couple of offshoots. So we do have to retrace our steps a little bit, but not all that much. And again, we're fighting a bunch of folks that we can't really build up at this point. I mean, we could build up Peg Powler if I took the time to specifically defeat 10 folks with it, but most of the folks here, I think, are immune to water. And Kushi and Drakai both need specific liquids that I don't remember if I bothered to use yet. This is at least the chapter where we get some of those. And here we finally find Acidia. It was kind of nice to get it right at the start of the second half of the chapter in the first continuity. Here we've sort of got to come to this out-of-the-way room off to the side. But at least it's easy enough to deal with. All I have to do is make sure to use only non-elemental attacks on it. And even without its final karma, Gaboy is still quite effective on anything that's weak to thunder. Shouldn't really try to capture a Peg Powler while there's another one hanging around, though. Especially now with 3 of them. But we did see this during one of the grinding videos where I came in here to build up Alhazred. So I guess this half of the chapter isn't quite as much news as the first one was. I was kind of hoping something interesting would be there, but I guess not. And I don't know whether it's breaking that crystal or just coming over to this side of the room that causes the Alrane to appear, but this is where we find them. And as much as I'd love to start killing Alrane with Alrane, even though I'm not keeping this file, so building up karmas is pretty meaningless, I don't think I'm going to be able to do a balance capture while there's another one active in the room. Maybe with 2 of them. I could always bond one of them and then capture the other. But I don't think I'm even going to be using Alrane for the rest of the chapter. It is a slash element, and we need a slash element to take down Brigantia's tail, but I don't think Alrane is the best one for the job. Ogma's probably the way you want to go, maybe Fraxinus. And like I said, we've seen the Malabaricus fight plenty of times before in this room. Especially without extra Alrane around like there were in Mystery Messenger. This guy's no problem anymore. And an even better time to rank up. And there I am getting prepared for the Brigantia fight before I remember that there's another room before I get there. And again, a room that I never bother returning to, so we only ever see this collection of folks once. Come to think of it, there aren't a lot of realms where I do bother to return to the last room right before the Folklore. And there's just not a whole lot of useful stuff there that you can't find elsewhere in the chapter a lot more easily. I guess it's good in the Fairy Realm because you get huge collections of either Puka or Kilmulis. Then again, I guess it's probably pronounced Kilmuli. But I accidentally moved on to the next room, so one Brigantia fight later. It wasn't quite as tough as I made it out to be. I think maybe the scene has a bit more emotional impact that way. And the rest of the chapter plays out exactly as it did. Getting to confront Hervé directly doesn't really give Ellen any more information. So I returned to the Fleshroom fight briefly, mostly so that I could show you that eye way up on the wall. People mentioned that you could hit that eye with Habitrot, and that's what that third picture in the picture book meant. Which is quite true. It's kinda subtle and hard to tell, but the eye is drooping at this point. And that eye is what summons the Thrump into the room. So as long as you can keep it asleep, they won't show up and attack you, which makes things a lot more manageable. As long as you don't accidentally target the center of the room when there's nothing there to hit. And just as a test, I'm wearing the Fairy Cloak, which will protect against bond attacks, which appears to be what the Deadly Heart uses. Granted, it does take down whatever folk I'm trying to slash it with, but it has no effect on Ellen at all. So wearing the appropriate cloak and keeping an eye on that eye up on the wall makes this fight a heck of a lot easier. And knowing that those arms that punch out of the walls have a really, really wide reach. If you're anywhere close, you need to defend or dodge. But I don't think this fight was a threat even when I had no idea what was going on. Now it's even less so. And I'm not sure whether Alrane is the best folk to attack with, but it does the job. And now, of course, I know to watch for the plaster falling from the ceiling as a signal that the Monty Python foot is coming. As always, Spriggan or Kilmulus works really well in this fight. As long as you know what to watch for, and when it's coming, you can get out of the way of the foot easily enough, or you can block it. The fist, I wouldn't even try to dodge. It just goes too far. And that's this fight, pretty much. Kinda nice to revisit it. Mostly because I didn't really spend much time with it in the main playthrough, and didn't really spend much time with it here. So to wrap things up, I kept forgetting to go back and talk to the Half-Lives at the end of each chapter, unless there was a specific reason for it to be nighttime. And the one big omission, I think, was at the end of Chapter 5. Now, Ellen can't get to the pub at the end of Chapter 5 because she's trapped in the Cursed Village, but I really miss talking to them as Keats, and so I definitely want to do that. Granted, it's not quite as interesting or suspenseful when we know what's happening. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the LP, and I hope you'll join me for my next one. See you then.